When a grieving judge takes in a lost boy with ties to her past, neither of them expects their lives to change forever. But as buried secrets unravel and new bonds are forged, they discover a truth that will redefine the meaning of family and love. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Judge Eleanor Whitfield presided over the morning's proceedings. Known for her strict demeanor and meticulous approach, Eleanor had earned the respect of her peers through years of unshakable dedication to justice. This morning was no different. She sat at her bench, eyes sharp behind her glasses, as she listened to arguments in a custody case. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, drawing everyone's attention. A young boy, no older than 12, stumbled into the room. His face was flushed, tears streaming down his cheeks, and he clutched a tattered backpack to his chest as though it were his lifeline. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes on the boy. Eleanor blinked, momentarily startled by the interruption. She tapped her gavel lightly to regain control. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Young man, who are you, and why are you interrupting these proceedings?" The boy took a shaky breath, his voice trembling as he spoke. "My name is Elijah Harper," he said, his words barely audible but filled with desperation. "Please. I need your help." Eleanor softened slightly, sensing the genuine fear in his voice. "Mr. Harper," she said, gesturing for him to step closer, "this is a courtroom. If you need assistance, you must explain yourself." Elijah hesitated, his small hands gripping the straps of his backpack. His gaze darted nervously around the room before finally settling on Eleanor. I think my dad is here," he said, his voice cracking. "My mom told me to find you." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, whispers of curiosity and confusion filling the air. Eleanor's expression tightened as she tapped her gavel again. "Order," she said, her tone sharp. She turned back to Elijah. "Who is your mother?" "Naomi Harper," Elijah replied, tears welling up in his eyes again. She passed away last year. Before she died, she told me to find someone named Eleanor Whitfield if I ever needed help. She said you'd know the truth." The name Naomi Harper struck Eleanor like a thunderclap. Her mind reeled as the memory of her college friend surfaced. Naomi had been one of her closest confidants during those formative years, but they had lost touch after graduation. Eleanor's heart tightened at the thought of Naomi's death and the desperate boy now standing before her. She gestured to a bailiff. "Clear the courtroom," she said firmly. "I'll hear this matter privately." The courtroom emptied quickly, leaving only Eleanor, Elijah, and a few essential staff members. She gestured for the boy to take a seat at the witness stand. Once he was seated, she leaned forward, her voice softer now. "Elijah, why did your mother send you to find me?" Elijah fidgeted nervously, his hands twisting the straps of his backpack. "She said you were the only person who could help me. She said, you knew my dad." Eleanor felt a pang of unease. "And who did she say your father was?" Elijah shook his head. "She didn't tell me his name. She just said he was someone important. And that you'd know." Eleanor's heart sank as a mix of emotions swirled within her, grief for her friend, confusion over the boy's claim, and a growing sense of responsibility. She studied Elijah closely, noting the unmistakable resemblance to someone she hadn't thought about in years. Could it be? Could this boy be connected to her brother, Jonathan? She straightened, her professional demeanor returning. "Elijah," she said carefully, "this is a lot to process, but I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of it. For now, I need you to stay here and rest. We'll figure this out together." Elijah nodded hesitantly, his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Judge Whitfield," he said quietly. Eleanor's mind raced as she dismissed the session for the day. If what Elijah said was true, her life, and his, was about to change in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat in her chambers, trying to piece together the whirlwind of emotions and questions Elijah's sudden appearance had stirred. The name Naomi Harper lingered in her mind like a ghost from the past. It had been over a decade since Eleanor had last seen Naomi, her once close friend from college. They had shared everything back then: dreams, secrets, and late-night conversations about their futures. But life had pulled them in different directions, and their friendship had faded with time. Eleanor tapped her pen against her desk, staring at the photograph Elijah had handed her. It was a worn, slightly faded picture of her and Naomi from their college days. They stood arm in arm, laughing at something out of frame. The sight of it brought a wave of bittersweet nostalgia and a deep ache in her chest. She looked up as a soft knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called. The bailiff stepped in, nodding respectfully. "Judge Whitfield, the boy, Elijah, is waiting in the break room. He seems unsettled." Eleanor sighed, her mind racing. "Bring him in," she said. "I need to speak with him." A few moments later, Elijah entered, clutching his backpack as if it were his shield. He looked nervous but determined, his gaze flicking around the room before landing on Eleanor. "Come, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I thought we could talk more about your mother and why she sent you to me." Elijah sat down, his small frame looking even smaller in the large leather chair. He hesitated before speaking. "My mom, she always said you were important," he began. "That you were someone she trusted." Eleanor folded her hands on her desk, her voice calm and steady. "She was a good friend of mine," she said softly. "We lost touch many years ago. Can you tell me more about her? What happened after she and I stopped speaking?" Elijah's face fell, and he looked down at his lap. "She didn't like to talk about the past much," he admitted. "But she used to tell me stories about her college days. She said those were some of the best times of her life. She said you were the kind of friend who always made her feel safe." Eleanor's heart ached at his words. "And your father?" she asked gently. "Did she ever tell you anything about him?" Elijah shook his head. "Not much. She said he was kind and brave, but she never told me his name. I used to ask, but she'd just say it didn't matter anymore." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. The pieces were starting to come together, but there were still so many unanswered questions. If Naomi hadn't shared the truth about Elijah's father, there must have been a reason. And yet, the boy's resemblance to her late brother Jonathan was too striking to ignore. "Do you know if your mother left anything behind that might help us?" Eleanor asked. "Letters, documents, anything that could give us more information?" Elijah hesitated, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and handed it to her. "This was hers," he said quietly. "I've been keeping it with me ever since she passed." Eleanor took the notebook carefully, opening it to the first page. Inside were Naomi's neat, flowing handwriting and entries dated over a decade ago. Flipping through the pages, Eleanor found journal entries detailing Naomi's struggles as a single mother, her hopes for Elijah's future, and cryptic mentions of a love she had lost but never forgotten. One entry, in particular, caught Eleanor's attention. "I wish I could tell Elijah the truth about his father, but I don't know how. Jonathan was everything I ever wanted, but life had other plans. If anything happens to me, I hope Eleanor will help him find the answers he deserves. She's the only one who can." Eleanor's breath hitched as she read the words. The truth was there, hidden in plain sight. Naomi's cryptic comments suddenly made sense. Elijah's father had been Jonathan, her own brother. She closed the notebook, her heart pounding. Looking up at Elijah, she saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the quiet hope that she might be able to give him the answers he sought. "Elijah," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I believe I know who your father was." His eyes widened, a mix of fear and anticipation. "You do?" Yes, she replied. But before I tell you, I want to be absolutely certain. I'll need to look into some things, but I promise you, we'll figure this out together. Elijah nodded, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. Thank you, he whispered. Eleanor smiled, though her mind was already racing ahead. The truth about Jonathan and Naomi's relationship had the power to change both of their lives. But as she looked at the boy sitting before her, so full of courage and vulnerability, she knew one thing for certain: she would do whatever it took to give him the answers, and the family he deserved. The next day, Eleanor found herself staring at her computer screen, her mind still reeling from the revelations in Naomi's journal. Her younger brother, Jonathan, had been a vibrant, charismatic man, full of life and promise before his tragic death in a car accident 13 years ago. The idea that he had a son, a boy who had been living without a father, shuffling through the foster system, was both heartbreaking and overwhelming. Determined to uncover the full truth, Eleanor made some calls to contacts from her law school days. She reached out to Naomi's former landlord, hoping to find more details about her life before she passed away. After several attempts, she finally reached someone who remembered Naomi and Elijah. She was a good tenant, the landlord, Mrs. Hargrove, said over the phone. Quiet, hard-working. She loved that boy of hers more than anything. Always talked about giving him a better life. Did she ever mention anything about Elijah's father? Eleanor asked, her tone cautious. Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. Not much. I know it was a painful topic for her. She once said he was someone she lost a long time ago, and she didn't want to dwell on it. But she kept a box of old letters and photos in her closet. I helped pack up her things when she got sick. A box? Eleanor's interest piqued. Do you know what happened to it? I think it's still in storage, Mrs. Hargrove replied. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. If you think it'll help Elijah, you're welcome to take a look. Eleanor thanked her profusely and arranged to visit the storage unit that afternoon. As she drove across town, her thoughts were a whirlwind of possibilities. If the box held more clues about Naomi and Jonathan's relationship, it could provide Elijah with the answers he desperately needed, and confirm the truth Eleanor was beginning to accept. At the storage unit, Mrs. Hargrove met her with a kind smile and led her to a small, neatly labeled box. Inside were items that spoke to Naomi's life: photographs, handwritten notes, and a few personal keepsakes. Eleanor carefully sifted through the contents until her hand brushed against an envelope marked with Jonathan's name. Her breath caught as she opened it. Inside was a series of letters Naomi had written to Jonathan but had never sent. The first one was dated shortly after Elijah's birth. Jonathan. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to send this, but I need you to know. We have a son. His name is Elijah, and he's beautiful, Jonathan. He has your eyes and your smile. I kept my pregnancy a secret because I didn't want to complicate your life, but now I wonder if I made the right choice. If you ever read this, please know that I never stopped loving you. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the words. The letters painted a picture of a woman torn between love and fear, unsure of how to share her secret but deeply devoted to the child she and Jonathan had created. One letter, written shortly before Naomi's death, was addressed directly to Elijah. My dearest Elijah. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, but I need you to know how much you are loved. Your father was an extraordinary man, and I wish you could have known him. If you ever feel lost, please find Eleanor Whitfield. She's someone I trusted completely, and I know she'll help you find your way. Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes as she folded the letter. She placed the letters and a few photos back in the box, knowing they would mean everything to Elijah. That evening, she returned to her chambers with the box in hand. Elijah was waiting for her, sitting nervously in one of the chairs near her desk. He stood up quickly when he saw her, his eyes filled with hope and trepidation. Did you find anything? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor placed the box on the desk and gestured for him to sit. "I did," she said gently. "Elijah, I found letters your mother wrote. They confirm what I suspected. Your father was my brother, Jonathan." Elijah's eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed unable to process the information. "So, you're my aunt?" he asked hesitantly. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. You have family, Elijah. You have me." Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes as he looked at the box of letters. "She always said my dad was someone special," he said softly. "I wish I could have met him." Eleanor reached across the desk and placed a hand on his. "I wish that too," she said. "But I'm here, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you have the life he would have wanted for you." For the first time since he had burst into the courtroom, Elijah smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that spoke of hope and the beginning of healing. Eleanor knew there was still a long journey ahead, but for the first time, they were walking it together. The morning after her emotional conversation with Elijah, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, sipping a cup of coffee as sunlight streamed through the windows. The letters from Naomi lingered in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were only part of the story. Naomi's words had been raw and heartfelt, but they also left unanswered questions, questions Eleanor was determined to resolve for Elijah's sake. After gathering her thoughts, she decided to visit her parents. It had been years since Jonathan's death, and the subject was still a sensitive one for her family. But if anyone could help her piece together the events leading up to Jonathan and Naomi's relationship, it was her mother, Margaret Whitfield. Arriving at the Whitfield estate, Eleanor parked her car in the circular driveway and made her way to the front door. Margaret greeted her with a warm smile, though her sharp eyes immediately noticed the tension in her daughter's expression. "Eleanor," Margaret said, leading her into the cozy sitting room. "What brings you here so early? Is everything all right?" Eleanor hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Jonathan." Margaret's face softened, but there was a flicker of pain in her eyes. "It's been so long," she said quietly. "But I think about him every day. What is it you want to know?" Eleanor pulled the photograph from Naomi's journal out of her bag and handed it to her mother. Margaret took the photo, her brows furrowing as she studied it. "Naomi Harper," she murmured, recognition dawning in her voice. "I remember her. She was a lovely young woman, always so kind. Jonathan thought the world of her." Eleanor leaned forward, her tone urgent. "What happened between them, Mom?" "Naomi had a son, and I believe Jonathan was his father. But she never told him. Why would she keep something like that from him?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, and she set the photo down on the coffee table. "I didn't know she had a child," she admitted. "But I remember Jonathan was very serious about her. He even talked about bringing her home to meet us. Your father, he didn't approve." Eleanor's heart sank. "Why not?" Margaret sighed deeply, her hands clasped in her lap. "Your father had certain expectations for Jonathan. He wanted him to focus on his career, to build the kind of life he thought was best for him. When he found out about Naomi, he thought she was a distraction. He told Jonathan he needed to let her go." Eleanor felt a surge of anger at her late father's interference. "And Jonathan listened to him?" Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He didn't want to, Eleanor. He was heartbroken. But he was young, and your father had a way of making his opinions feel like orders. Jonathan let her go because he thought he was doing the right thing." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Naomi must have been pregnant when they broke up," she said, more to herself than to her mother. "She must have thought she was sparing Jonathan by keeping the pregnancy a secret." Margaret nodded slowly. "It sounds like something she would do. She always seemed so selfless." Eleanor sat in silence for a moment, processing the weight of her mother's words. The story of Jonathan and Naomi was one of love, sacrifice, and missed opportunities. But now, all these years later, there was a chance to make things right. "I've been spending time with Naomi's son," Eleanor said finally. "His name is Elijah. He's an incredible boy, Mom, but he's been through so much. I need to make sure he knows he has a family." Margaret reached over and took Eleanor's hand. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor. Jonathan would want you to take care of him." As Eleanor drove back to the courthouse, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had always thought of herself as someone who upheld justice, but this felt different. This wasn't about laws or rulings, this was about family. And she was determined to give Elijah the love and stability he deserved. Later that afternoon, Eleanor met with Elijah in her chambers. The boy looked more at ease than he had a few days ago, but there was still a guardedness in his demeanor. "I went to see my mom today," Eleanor began, sitting down across from him. "Your grandmother." Elijah's eyes widened. "You did? What did she say?" "She remembers your mom," Eleanor said. "She told me about how much Jonathan cared for her. And she told me that your dad didn't want to let her go, but sometimes, life makes decisions for us that we can't control." Elijah nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his chair. "So, he didn't leave because he didn't care?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "He cared deeply. And if he had known about you, I know he would have been in your life. But now, we have a chance to honor him by taking care of each other." Elijah met her gaze, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "Do you think I'm like him?" Eleanor smiled, her voice warm. "I see so much of him in you. You have his strength, his kindness, and his heart." For the first time, Elijah's guarded expression softened into something resembling trust. "I want to know more about him," he said. "And about this family." "And you will," Eleanor promised. "We're going to figure this out together. You're not alone anymore, Elijah. Not ever again." As the boy nodded, Eleanor felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew they were on the right path. Together, they were beginning to heal the wounds of the past and build a future rooted in love, resilience, and the memory of the man who had unknowingly brought them together. The days following Eleanor's conversation with her mother were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Elijah had begun to open up more, trusting Eleanor in a way he hadn't trusted anyone since his mother's passing. But there was still a sense of uncertainty lingering in his eyes, a boy unsure of where he fit in the world. Eleanor was determined to change that. One morning, Eleanor decided it was time to show Elijah a piece of his father's history. She retrieved a dusty box from her attic, labeled "Jonathan's Keepsakes." Inside were mementos from her brother's life, trophies from his high school soccer team, a few favorite books, and a leather-bound journal he had kept during his teenage years. Eleanor brought the box to her chambers at the courthouse, where Elijah was waiting for her after school. The boy perked up when he saw her enter the room, his eyes darting to the box in her hands. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity lighting up his face. Eleanor placed the box on the table and smiled. "This belonged to your dad," she said. "I thought you might like to see some of his things." Elijah hesitated for a moment, then moved closer, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the box. He opened it carefully, as if afraid he might damage the contents. His eyes widened as he pulled out a small soccer trophy, the engraving reading, "MVP, Regional Championship, 2006. "He played soccer?" Elijah asked, turning the trophy over in his hands. Eleanor nodded, her smile soft. "He loved it. He used to spend hours practicing in the backyard, and he was the star of his team. He was quick, determined, and a natural leader." Elijah set the trophy down and picked up a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The edges of the pages were yellowed, and the spine was cracked from years of use. "This was his favorite book?" he asked. One of them, Eleanor said. He admired Atticus Finch, said he wanted to be the kind of person who stood up for what was right, no matter how hard it was. As Elijah continued to explore the box, he came across the leather-bound journal. His fingers hovered over it, hesitant. "Is it okay if I look inside?" he asked. "Of course," Eleanor said gently. "It's yours now." Elijah opened the journal to the first page, where Jonathan's neat handwriting greeted him. The entries were dated, starting from Jonathan's senior year of high school. Elijah read aloud one of the passages. "Today, I told Naomi how I feel about her. I was so nervous I could barely speak, but she just smiled that incredible smile of hers and said she felt the same. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Elijah looked up at Eleanor, his eyes wide. "He wrote about her." "He did," Eleanor said softly. "She was so important to him. He cared for her deeply." Elijah turned the pages, reading more entries about Jonathan's dreams, struggles, and his growing love for Naomi. The journal painted a vivid picture of a young man full of passion and kindness, someone who would have been proud to call Elijah his son. "I feel like I'm getting to know him," Elijah said, his voice trembling. "Like, he's not just some story anymore." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "That's because he's a part of you, Elijah. Everything he was, his kindness, his strength, it's all in you. And now you get to carry his legacy forward." Elijah nodded, his grip on the journal tightening. "I wish he could have met me," he said quietly. "I wish I could have told him about my life." Eleanor's heart ached at his words. "I know," she said. "But I think he'd be so proud of the person you're becoming. And I know he'd want you to feel loved and supported, just like he tried to make everyone around him feel." That evening, as they sat together reading more of Jonathan's journal, Elijah began to ask questions about the Whitfield family. He wanted to know more about their history, their traditions, and what it was like growing up with Jonathan as a brother. Eleanor answered every question with patience and honesty, painting a vivid picture of the man Elijah would never meet but could now begin to understand. By the time they finished, Elijah's shoulders were relaxed, and his expression was lighter. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "For showing me all of this. For helping me feel like I belong." "You do belong," Eleanor said, her voice firm but warm. "You're part of this family, Elijah. And we're going to make sure you never feel alone again." As Elijah hugged the journal to his chest, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. They were piecing together a broken past, one memory at a time, and in doing so, they were building something new, something stronger, rooted in love and resilience. For the first time, Eleanor felt certain that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Over the next week, Eleanor and Elijah began to settle into a new rhythm. The boy spent his afternoons in her chambers after school, working on his homework while Eleanor managed her court schedule. It was an arrangement that offered Elijah a sense of stability, and Eleanor found herself cherishing the time they spent together. For the first time in years, her usually solitary life felt full. One afternoon, Eleanor noticed Elijah staring at a piece of paper on the desk, his pencil hovering over it. His brow was furrowed, and his lips were pressed into a tight line. She walked over and gently placed a hand on the back of his chair. "What's troubling you?" she asked. Elijah sighed and pushed the paper toward her. It was an essay for school, titled, "What Family Means to Me." "I don't know what to write," he admitted. "I mean, I don't really know what family is supposed to be like." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. She pulled up a chair and sat beside him, taking a moment to think before speaking. "Family isn't just about the people you're related to by blood," she said softly. "It's about the people who care for you, who support you, and who make you feel safe. Family is the people who stay, no matter what." Elijah looked up at her, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you think my dad would have been that kind of person?" he asked. I know he would have, Eleanor said with certainty. Jonathan had a way of making everyone around him feel special. He would have loved you more than anything. Elijah nodded slowly, his expression softening. I guess I do have a family now, he said quietly. With you. You do, Eleanor said, her voice firm but warm. And I'm here for you, always. That evening, Eleanor decided it was time to introduce Elijah to another part of his father's life. She took him to the Whitfield family home, a place where Jonathan had spent his happiest years. The house was large but welcoming, filled with memories of laughter and love. As they walked through the rooms, Eleanor pointed out photos of Jonathan and shared stories about his childhood. There was a picture of him as a little boy, sitting on a tricycle with a mischievous grin. Another showed him holding up a massive fish he'd caught on a family vacation. Elijah listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. He looks so happy, Elijah said, stopping in front of a photo of Jonathan holding a soccer ball, his arm around a younger Eleanor. He was, Eleanor said with a smile. And he would have wanted you to be happy, too. In Jonathan's old bedroom, Eleanor showed Elijah a box of his father's belongings. Inside were soccer jerseys, medals, and letters he had written but never sent. Elijah pulled out a medal and held it up, his fingers tracing the engraved words, Team Captain, Regional Finals. He must have been really good at soccer, Elijah said, a hint of pride in his voice. He was, Eleanor said. And from what I've seen, you've got a lot of his determination. As the evening went on, Elijah grew more comfortable in the house, exploring the rooms and asking questions about his father's life. Eleanor watched him with a sense of quiet pride, knowing that he was beginning to find a connection to the family he had never known. Before they left, Eleanor took Elijah out to the backyard. The moonlight bathed the space in a soft glow, and the air was filled with the faint hum of crickets. She pointed to an old oak tree near the edge of the yard. Your dad used to climb that tree all the time, she said. He'd sit on the highest branch and say he could see the whole world from up there. Elijah smiled, looking up at the tree. I wish I could have seen the world with him. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. In a way, you still can, she said. Through the stories, the memories, and the people who loved him. You carry him with you, Elijah. As they drove back to Eleanor's house, Elijah sat quietly, holding one of Jonathan's medals in his hand. When they arrived home, he turned to Eleanor with a small, shy smile. Thank you, he said. For showing me all of this. It makes me feel closer to him. Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. You're welcome, Elijah. And remember, you're part of this family now. You'll never be alone again. That night, as Elijah fell asleep clutching the medal, Eleanor stood in the doorway of his room, watching over him. The boy who had once been a stranger was now a part of her life, and she was determined to honor Jonathan's memory by giving Elijah the love and support he deserved. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that they were both exactly where they were meant to be. The days following Elijah's visit to the Whitfield family home were transformative. Eleanor noticed a visible change in the boy. He stood a little taller, smiled more often, and seemed more comfortable in his new environment. He had started to trust that he belonged, and for Eleanor, it was a joy to watch him begin to heal. One Saturday morning, Eleanor decided it was time to take Elijah to the park where Jonathan had spent much of his youth. It was a place filled with memories of family picnics, soccer games, and long walks under the shade of towering oak trees. Eleanor wanted Elijah to see the world through his father's eyes, to connect with the places that had shaped him. The park was lively that day, with children laughing and families gathered around picnic tables. Eleanor and Elijah walked along the paved paths, the sound of birdsong mixing with the chatter of visitors. As they approached a small soccer field, Eleanor pointed to the goalposts. This is where your dad played his first soccer game, she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. He was so nervous, but once the game started, he forgot all about his fears. He scored the winning goal that day. Elijah grinned, imagining his father running across the field, full of energy and determination. "Do you think I could be as good as he was?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "I think you have every bit of his talent and heart. If you wanted to play, I know he'd be cheering you on." They continued their walk until they reached a quiet grove of trees near the edge of the park. Eleanor stopped and gestured to a specific tree, its branches stretching high into the sky. "This was your dad's favorite spot," she said. "He used to climb up there and sit for hours, sketching or writing in his journal." Elijah stared up at the tree, a look of wonder on his face. "I wish I could have done that with him," he said softly. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "In a way, you are," she said. "You're here now, experiencing the same things he loved. That's a connection no one can take away." Elijah nodded, his gaze lingering on the tree. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he set down his backpack and began climbing. Eleanor watched nervously at first, but as he scaled the branches with ease, she couldn't help but smile. He looked so much like Jonathan in that moment, determined, fearless, and free. When he reached a sturdy branch, Elijah sat down and looked out over the park. "You're right," he called down. "It's like you can see the whole world from up here." Eleanor laughed, relief washing over her. "Just be careful up there," she said, her voice warm. After Elijah climbed down, they sat together on a nearby bench. Eleanor pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her bag. "I brought something for you," she said, handing it to him. Elijah opened the notebook and found that it was blank, its pages waiting to be filled. "What's this for?" he asked. "For your own stories," Eleanor said. "Your dad used to write in a journal just like this. I thought you might like to do the same." Elijah ran his fingers over the cover, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I think I'd like that," he said. "I could write about today. About the tree and the park and everything." "That's a wonderful idea," Eleanor said. "And one day, when you look back on these pages, you'll see how far you've come." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Eleanor and Elijah made their way back to the car. On the drive home, Elijah sat quietly, the notebook resting on his lap. When they pulled into the driveway, he turned to Eleanor with a small, genuine smile. "Thank you," he said. "For taking me there. For showing me all these things about my dad." Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're welcome, Elijah. And thank you for letting me share them with you." That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she thought about how much had changed since the day Elijah had burst into her courtroom. He had come into her life like a storm, full of chaos and uncertainty, but now he felt like a part of her family. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them, together. In his room, Elijah sat at his desk, writing in his new journal. His words came easily, flowing from the pen like water. He wrote about the park, the tree, and the stories Eleanor had shared. He wrote about his dad, the man he was beginning to know through memories and connections. And he wrote about Eleanor, the aunt who had given him a home and a place to belong. When he finally closed the journal and climbed into bed, a sense of peace settled over him. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he felt certain of one thing: he was no longer alone. He had a family, and he had a future. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at home. As the weeks turned into months, Elijah and Eleanor found themselves settling into a rhythm that felt natural and comforting. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and the weight of uncertainty that had once clouded their lives began to lift. Eleanor had officially started the process of becoming Elijah's legal guardian, a decision that filled her with both responsibility and hope. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor received a letter in the mail from the family court. It was the final confirmation of her guardianship, a formal recognition that she was now Elijah's legal parent. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the document, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew what she had to do next. That evening, after Elijah finished his homework, Eleanor called him into the living room. He entered cautiously, his curious eyes scanning her face. "What's up?" he asked, sensing something important. Eleanor held up the letter and smiled. "It's official," she said. "I'm your legal guardian now." For a moment, Elijah stared at her in disbelief, as if the words were too good to be true. Then, a wide smile broke across his face, and he launched himself into her arms. "Really?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "Really," Eleanor said, hugging him tightly. "You're stuck with me now." Elijah laughed through his tears, and for the first time, he allowed himself to fully believe that he had found a home. To celebrate the occasion, Eleanor planned a small gathering at the Whitfield family home. She invited close friends and a few of Jonathan's old teammates, people who had been a part of his life and could share stories with Elijah. The house was filled with warmth and laughter as everyone came together to honor Jonathan's memory and celebrate Elijah's new beginning. Eleanor had also arranged for a special tribute. In the backyard, beneath the towering oak tree that Jonathan had loved so much, she and Elijah had planted a small sapling weeks earlier. Now, a plaque rested at its base, engraved with the words, "In memory of Jonathan Whitfield, a life of love, strength, and adventure." As the sun set, casting golden light across the yard, Eleanor gathered everyone around the tree. She placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder and began to speak. "This tree is a symbol of Jonathan's legacy," she said, her voice steady. "It's a reminder of the love he gave to those around him and the strength he passed on to his son. Elijah, you carry that legacy forward every day. And I know he'd be so proud of the person you're becoming." Elijah stepped forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked around at the faces of the people who had come to support him, then back at the tree. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "For helping me feel like I belong. For helping me feel like I have a family." The crowd erupted into applause, and Eleanor pulled Elijah into a hug, her heart bursting with pride and love. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, Eleanor and Elijah sat together in the living room, reflecting on the day. Elijah held the leather-bound journal Eleanor had given him, now filled with his own stories and thoughts. "Do you think he's watching us?" he asked, his voice soft. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "I do," she said. "And I think he's smiling. He'd be so proud of you, Elijah. And so am I." Elijah leaned his head against her shoulder, a peaceful smile on his face. "I'm proud of us, too," he said. "We're a family now, right?" "We always were," Eleanor replied, wrapping an arm around him. "We just had to find our way to each other." As the fire crackled softly in the fireplace, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The journey they had taken together had been full of challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of love, growth, and connection. They had built something beautiful out of the broken pieces of the past, a family rooted in resilience and bound by love. And in that moment, as they sat together in the quiet warmth of their home, Eleanor knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. This story is a heartfelt testament to the power of connection, resilience, and the enduring bonds of family. It beautifully illustrates how love and understanding can bridge the gap between past and present, healing wounds that seemed impossible to mend. Eleanor's journey from a solitary judge to a devoted guardian reflects the profound impact that compassion and a willingness to embrace change can have, not only on one's own life but also on the lives of others. Elijah's transformation from a lost and guarded boy to someone who feels loved and valued highlights the importance of belonging and identity. Through Eleanor's dedication, he not only learns about his father's legacy but also begins to write his own story, rooted in the strength and love passed down to him. The moments of reflection, the planting of the tree, and the shared memories of Jonathan create a narrative that feels deeply human, full of joy, sorrow, and hope. It's a reminder that even in the face of loss, we can honor the people we've loved by carrying their legacy forward and building something beautiful in their memory. Ultimately, this story leaves us with a sense of hope and inspiration. It shows that family is not just about blood ties but about the choices we make, the love we give, and the courage to create something meaningful out of life's most unexpected twists and turns.